Take on the South is back with its miniseries Southern Seance, in which we ask famous deceased Southerners through OpenAI ChatGPT about their thoughts on the South. But to test just how reliable AI and ChatGPT is, we need human expertise. And so, for every famous deceased Southerner we interview on Southern Seance, we have a real-life human expert who will judge AI's efforts. We've done Elvis, we've done Lyndon Johnson, we've done William Faulkner. Today we turn to the legendary Rosa Parks. Our living expert to critique and evaluate AI's handling of Rosa Parks as Southerner is Professor Stephanie Mitchem, one of the stellar scholars in the Religious Studies program at USC. A former director of the Women's and Gender Studies program, Professor Mitchem is prolific and highly regarded. She has 6 books to her name, including Race, Religion and Politics Towards Human Rights in the U.S. and African American Women Tapping Power and Spiritual Wellness. Stephanie, welcome to Take on the South.
Thank you so much. This is a pleasure.
Well, thanks for doing this. It can be a very interesting exercise, this. So, as I said, I asked ChatGPT to engage Rosa Parks as Southerner. And let me read the script, or rather, let me read the prompt that I gave ChatGPT, and then we can go through what it spat back, all right? So what I asked ChatGPT to do was write a script for an interview with Mark Smith, host of Take on the South podcast, and Rosa Parks, detailing how and why she understood herself as Southern, how her upbringing in the South influenced her attitude towards the region, and how her roots shaped her understanding of civil rights and Southern African American women. And let's just read these parts, okay? Because what it spat back was, interestingly, it gave it a title. I didn't ask it to, but it gave it a title, and it said, Southern Roots and Civil Rights, a Conversation with Rosa Parks. So, it has me saying, good evening, everyone. It always has me say good evening. I don't know why, but it's always good evening. Welcome to another episode of Take on the South. I'm your host, Mark Smith, and today we have a very special guest, the iconic figure in the civil rights movement, Ms. Rosa Parks. Ms. Parks, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you, Mark. It's a pleasure to be on your show.
All right, then we go into segment 1, Understanding Herself as Southern. Again, ChatGPT identified that as a segment. Ms. Parks, let's start by exploring your connection to the South. How did you understand yourself as a Southern woman? And how did your upbringing in the region shape your identity?
Well, Mark, I was born in Tuskegee, Alabama, and grew up in the segregated South. From a young age, I was immersed in the rich culture and traditions of the region. Despite the challenges of segregation, I felt a deep connection to the land and the people. The South was home, and I carried that identity with me throughout my life.
Segment 2, Influence of Upbringing on Attitude. Your upbringing in the South undoubtedly played a significant role in shaping who you are. Can you tell us how it influenced your attitude towards the region, especially in the context of the racial tensions and struggles for civil rights?
Absolutely, Mark. Growing up in the South, I witnessed the harsh realities of segregation and racism. These experiences fueled my determination to stand up against injustice. The warmth and resilience of the Southern community, despite the adversities, inspired me to believe in the possibility of change. I knew that we could create a better, more equitable South.
Now, segment 3, Roots and Understanding of Civil Rights. Moving forward, let's discuss how your roots in the South shaped your understanding of civil rights. How did your experiences contribute to your role in the movement?
My roots were deeply intertwined with the struggle for equality. The teachings of my grandparents and parents about self-respect and dignity resonated with the principles of the civil rights movement. I saw the strength and courage of Southern African American women who were the backbone of our communities. It was their stories and struggles that fueled my commitment to fighting for justice and equality.
Ms. Parks, your journey and insights are truly inspiring. Thank you for sharing your thoughts on how your Southern roots influenced your remarkable contributions to the civil rights movement. And to our listeners, thank you for joining us on another episode of Take on the South. Until next time, stay engaged and keep the conversation alive. Good night. All right, there we are. That's what ChatGPT has to say, in response to a very kind of specific question. What are your thoughts, Stephanie, as you read this? What are your thoughts? What does it get right, and what does it get wrong, if anything?
One of the joys of working with history is that it is a complex subject. It's not flat, it's not simple, and it's not sanitized, as is this. This is very sanitary.
Yeah.
For example, it says, I was born in Tuskegee and grew up in the segregated South, and I was immersed in the rich culture.
Right.
So I don't know if learning to sleep with your clothes on at night in case the Klan comes is part of that rich culture and tradition.
Right. And this is true of virtually all of the ChatGPT responses we've had. It's flat. It lacks the texture of the past, right?
Right.
And that's where human expertise comes in, right? You know some details, you know her life, you know the larger context in which she existed. So it's flat, it's a bit insipid, and it's safe, isn't it?
Oh, yeah. Oh, my gosh. Every time the South was home, I
Right.
carried that identity with me. I mean, it sounds... So even as I say I'm struggling with segregation, but I love it here.
Right. What is there any element of truth in that for Rosa Parks? What was her relationship to her Southern upbringing?
So she started off, like I said, learning to sleep with her clothes on, but she also became involved. When we think about who Rosa Parks is, a lot of people just get into the sitting down on the bus deal.
Right.
She was a well-trained activist, both she and her husband. So the decision to sit down on that bus came after years. I think it was in 1955. It came after years of being an activist. So one of the things you don't know about me from my bio is that I'm from Detroit. And so there is a deep connection with Rosa Parks because of that. Rosa Parks, after she, let me go back. One of the things that we don't think about is Rosa Parks as an activist. And that included her fighting for rights for women who had been raped. ChatGPT isn't going to talk about that.
Right.
And one of the interviews, she worked for NAACP. One of the interviews she did was very famous. That was a Mrs. Reese Taylor, I believe. All of this happened before her sitting down on that bus. And it wasn't about her sitting and being tired. And I've seen her portrayed in that way at times. She was maybe the third person to take a seat on the bus. So it's not just you walk in, you pay your money, and you walk to the back of the bus. You must walk in, pay your money, get off the bus, go around to the back door and go in.
Right.
ChatGPT isn't going to know that. Right. So I think one of the first people, it was actually a man who walked in and walked through the bus and sat down in the back. But the bus driver still stopped, pulled over, called the sheriff, and the sheriff grabbed the guy off the bus and beat him to death. There were then 2 or 3 different women who did that as well. And these people were all trained. They were all activists. I don't know if that first guy was, but the rest of them were. And it wasn't until Rosa Parks being seated that really kicked off Birmingham's civil rights movements, bus boycotts, all those kinds of things. But what was interesting, so I said I'm from Detroit. After that happened, she was not well regarded. So we see some of that today in the way that people who step forward and do things speak up, and then the community, instead of lionizing that person, turns against them. So people were saying things like she wasn't really black. Some people were accusing her of she didn't need to be on the bus. She had a car.
Were African American people saying
Yes.
this within the community?
Yes.
Why?
Because we're a complex community.
Because she was being disruptive?
Yeah.
And it made their lives apparently more difficult, even though the long
Yes.
run there was an
Yes.
obvious dividend? Interesting.
Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, people will say, I'm here, I'm safe. Why are you making things unsafe?
Yeah, gotcha.
Meanwhile, the white community was a bit more icky about it. Here's my lack of words, right? She lost her job as at a department store. She was a tailor. Her husband lost his job, and he went into depression. So they decided to move. And when they moved to Detroit. When they moved, so this idea of the Southern roots, Detroit is a city that was where the African American community, there's two African American communities. One is like the landed gentry that was there, but everybody else was an immigrant from the South.
Right.
My own family was immigrated from the South, actually from South Carolina, my father's family. So we often referred to a place like Detroit as up South.
Huh.
And in that, we would have clubs throughout the city. So there was the South Carolina club and this club. Everybody stayed away from the Mississippi club because they were crazy. I don't know why. And so Rosa Parks came up, but she and her husband, when they got there, it still was not comfortable.
So this up south idea, Detroit, has this connection to Rosa Parks that ChatGPT is just not catching on. I mean, were you surprised that not even the bus boycott came up in this interview?
Yeah, or the Scottsboro Boys.
Right.
She had worked with that.
Right.
I mean, all of that was part of her. She went to the Highlander School.
Yeah. Where is all of this?
Yeah.
I mean, it's not as though that's obscure knowledge either, right?
Right.
But do you think that feeds into this kind of more sanitized, generalized civil rights movement without the specifics? Is that what's going on here?
Someone reminded me of a phrase from Cornel West, the Santa Clausification. Right, so you turn everybody into this nice, gentle old figure. And she was like that, you know. MLK was like that. Everybody's kind of cleaned up and made pretty again.
Right.
Probably not Malcolm X, but other than that,
Sure.
Other than that, everybody else is kind of dressed up like, aren't they wonderful? But it wasn't easy, and even making the choice to be an activist at that time was not like a slam dunk. You weren't going to necessarily say that, sure, I'm going to stand up for this. All
right. So there's nothing, in your estimation, technically wrong with what ChatGPT says. Like the facts are, you know, she was influenced by her parents. She was from Tuskegee. I mean, these are basic facts that are true. But in a way, what I'm hearing you say is the kind of sanitized version of the civil rights movement is being replicated and reinscribed by ChatGPT AI, right?
Right. And it could just be the limits of the system where they just skim the surface of
whatever they're harvesting, right?
Yeah,
right.
Just like pulling information off. And, you know, if a student did that, the result would be you'd get a C.
Yeah, this is
C minus.
Right. This is what's coming up time and time again, that is functional as a treatment. but it's average, right?
I never thought I would say this. This makes me appreciate Wikipedia more. Because at least in Wikipedia, they're going to give a list of resources.
Right.
So a student could turn to Wikipedia, look something up, don't write from it, don't cite it, don't copy it, but look through the list of resources and then follow those trails.
Right. Yeah, no, your point is very well taken. And this whole business about the prehistory of Rosa Parks and the post-history, with the Montgomery boycott as the kind of pivot, the classic pivot, this is so true. We need to do one for Homer Plessy, because Homer Plessy had a similar kind of history in which, the Montgomery boycott is always, she was tired, she sat down. I mean, you see that all the time. The same is true with Homer Plessy, But that was planned too. He was an activist from New Orleans, and they planned it. They planned that whole thing to test this segregation statute. And, his history after Plessy versus Ferguson was similarly complicated. So I might actually do one for Homer Plessy and bring it into dialogue with this interview about Rosa Parks to see if there is a consistency with the prehistory question, the complicated stuff, for these two black activists, because that's what they were, right? We'll see. We'll have to follow up on that. Have to find an expert for that. And experts are hard to find, right?
Yes.
So, Stephanie, as you go through this, what would you recommend to students, right, if they're going to use ChatGPT to examine the civil rights movement with significant figures like Rosa Parks? What would you say to them? What advice would you give to them? Don't?
I'm pretty much leaning toward don't. I think I might say, if you are totally out of ideas as you are writing, see what ChatGPT, what it brings forward, and then don't use that.
Right, fine.
Then go deeper. Then ask the next set of questions. This was so. And it could be the way you framed the question, where you said,
very likely,
with her roots shaping her understandings. So everything got into a prettified version of, I love the South, I love the food, I love the. I mean, the South is a complicated place,
right? And it's a really good point, because I do think it has a lot to do with the way that I framed the question. But equally, it could have spat back on roots everything you just said. Right. Every kind of piece of grit and texture and complication is equally amenable to answering the question in that way. And it didn't. It chose not to, or its resources didn't give it that.
But all of that is available online. I mean, if it's skimming the surface.
Right. And I'm not sure where it's getting it from, because, as you say, there's no footnotes, right? There's no notes, and that's problematic. I'm just wondering if this kind of version is something that it wants you to believe, or it's really a reflection of just what is available to it to determine the story.
I wonder if it uses the most common, because in a lot of ways, these are the most common understandings. Like if you see this information pop up 5 times, I'll use it. But some of it, clearly, they were making up. African American women who were the backbone of our communities. Well, where did that come from?
What does that
why?
Mean?
And what does that mean?
Right.
I don't even know.
It's like a kind of pablum. It's an offering. It's just like, take this bit and make you feel better, right? I've noticed a pattern, though, with this, and it might be something to do with the word Southern. So Elvis, LBJ, William Faulkner, a lot of, when we ask this a very similar question, I try to keep the question very similar, just change the person. The ChatGPT will often refer to land, right, as a kind of the basis of the South, and it crops up in this response too. So there's something about the South and land as a shaper of character and experience, And it might be that's throwing it off. I don't know. It's not so much Rosa Parks, it's the word Southern, right? That might be what's going on here, because we see it crop up at time and time again, with depending on who we're looking at. But we saw it with Faulkner, and I think we saw it with LBJ. So that might be the issue, which is interesting to me because it's harvesting from a Southern rather than a Rosa Parks archive, right? And what it doesn't say, as you say, is very interesting. This absence of historical detail. Even the bus boycott is not in here. Very strange, right?
When people talk about the South, it is so complicated. It's not a lot of agrarian people hanging out together and arguing about politics.
Right.
It's complicated. It's layered, I guess is what I want to say. Land is one portion of it, but land is a portion for any group of people anywhere in the world.
Right, it's a generic answer.
Right.
The land is important. I'm not. I think the longer you talk, the less I'm inclined to think it's a C, more like a D for an essay. Right? It's just really thin, this one, and understandably so. I wonder what it's going to look like, when ChatGPT becomes stronger or more robust or powerful. So, any closing thoughts, Stephanie, on this kind of technology to explore African American women's experience? I mean, do you have any sort of general observation that you want people to take away?
My research on African American women led me to history as one of my focus areas, because there is so much that is not written about African American women, and it's not the first book or the second book or even primary sources that gives me information. It's complicated, and I would say anyone who wants to do historical studies of African American women, don't try to find something oversimplified. One of the things that I often find people will do is to say, Black women have had so much trauma, and if you don't show trauma, you're not telling their story. Well, people don't live day to day and say, I am in trauma. They live. And how do they live? And so there are people within the stories that explain how people can thrive despite anything.
Yeah.
It's complicated. ChatGPT would not be helpful. The resources are still being developed, and sometimes painfully.
Wise words, fabulous counsel, good advice. Professor Stephanie Mitchem, thank you for being on Take on the South.
You're very welcome. Thank you for inviting me.
A pleasure.